Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Today we're pleased to present Lean UX for Growth. I'm Jeanette DePatty from the Lean Startup Conference happening November 16th through 19th in San Francisco. Visit leanstartup.co for more information. Our speakers today are Laura Klein and Kirsten Cluthe. Laura Klein is a Lean UX and research expert in Silicon Valley where she teaches companies how to get to know their users and build products people will love. She blogs about UX, metrics, customer development, and startups at usersknow.com. Laura will be speaking at the Lean Startup Conference in 2015, is a conference faculty member and advisor to the Lean Startup Company. Kirsten Cluthe is editorial director for the 2015 Lean Startup Conference. With an extensive background in programming, production, and talent management, she aims to bring the most interesting and relevant speakers to the Lean Startup stage, alongside world-class conference experiences. Just a few housekeeping notes. We'll take questions from the audience via live chat. If you'd like to ask a question, please flag it with the letter Q and a colon. The speakers will answer questions in the second half of the webcast, so there's no need to ask your questions twice. This is a 1-hour program, and the recording will be available a few days after this live webcast. Take it away, Kirsten.
Thanks, Jeanette. And hi, everybody. Sorry for the slight delay in getting going this morning, but we're glad that you're here. I'm thrilled to be talking with Laura Klein today about designing for growth. Laura is a great friend of the Lean Startup community and will be speaking at this year's conference, and we're very happy to have her, so you have to be sure to check her out when she's on stage this year. Anyway, so just getting right into it because we've got a lot to cover today. I'd like to start with some context around the idea of designing for growth. Can you sort of give us a top-down view of what this means to organizations and how people should think about it?
Sure. So I always like to say that. Oh, hi everybody! Thanks for joining us. Some of you joined us twice even. So I always like to say that once upon a time, in a beautiful valley made of silicon, we had a way of making products, and that was that we would go off into our garages for a year or two, and we would build something perfect, and then we would ship it out to people and hope that they used it. I think that over the last 20 years or so, we've made some strides. We've improved that, and over the last 6 or so, Lean Startup has really helped with that, right? That we know now we should be getting out of the building, we should be talking to users, we should be doing customer development, understanding how people, actually use our product, what they want, what they, how they use things, and that's fantastic. I'm so glad that we're doing that. The problem, of course, is that we still sometimes have this issue. A lot of companies that I work with have this problem that they can very easily get to, those first 10 users, those first 100 users, maybe 1,000 users, those really excited, passionate early adopters that we all know we should be looking for, and they're building something wonderful for those folks. And then at some point, they need to turn it into a business. It's no longer about what can I do for these, first 100 folks. It's, okay, great. How do I grow this? How do I start automating this? How do I make this into a real thing? And that can be a very tough transition. In Jeffrey Moore's terms, how do I cross that chasm from early adopters to the mainstream? It's super tricky. And the great thing is that we're starting to understand more about how products grow and how we acquire and engage and retain users so that we can see that hockey stick growth at some point. Now, I think it's really interesting because as much as I love UX designers and product managers, and am one, I think sometimes we don't always understand the basics of how products grow. We're still, and I think this is great, we're still just, we're building a great product and then throwing it over the wall to marketing, right? Saying, okay, great, look, we have this fabulous product. Go sell it, right? It's your problem now. It's the sales team. Give it to the sales team. They'll sell it. But the truth is, there are a lot of things that we can do as PMs, as UX designers, as entrepreneurs, to build growth right into the product, to make it so that it grows more naturally, and it isn't just something that we sort of, tack on at the end. We don't come in and, sprinkle some growth on it, and, or just hire a growth hacker and, make them worry about it.
So I'm going to ask you to explain what a growth hacker is for the general population, because I know that it's sort of a term that I've run across a couple of times, but some people may not understand what that means. And then the other part of what my question is, since we're talking about product and design working together with marketing in theory, this sort of translates to a growth team. And how is that working? And how do growth hackers and growth teams work together? Are they two completely separate things? Sort of, how does that all work in the context of the business?
Sure. So I think the term growth hacker showed up initially maybe in 2011. So we're still very much in the figuring it out stage. Sean Ellis came up with the term. I think it's a good one. It generally refers to a fairly technical marketing person, or you can call it a full stack marketer, right? Somebody who can both come up with ideas for acquisition and growth, and then also implement them, and then measure them and test them. That said, there are as many definitions of growth hacker, I think, as there are of UX designer. So maybe at some point they'll get their own magical animal like a unicorn, like UX designers have. But I think growth teams have been around for a little bit longer. They haven't always necessarily been called growth teams, but those are teams within larger companies that are just, their entire purpose is to get more engaged, retained users, to make that growth, to make that user, chart go up and to the right. That is their entire thing. They run a lot of experiments. They spend a lot of time trying to understand what would get people to come into the product, what would get people to stay. They're looking for very specific metrics. They tend to be very data-driven. And companies like Twitter and LinkedIn have had them for a while. They, at a larger company, it tends not to be one growth hacker, obviously. It's not like there's one person in the basement of LinkedIn who's like, oh, got to get some more users today. It'll be a whole team of people, product managers, marketers, UX people, engineers, obviously, who are all running these experiments, coming up with new ones. And it's an exciting field. And I think it's fairly new to think about it as really separate, both separate from the product, but sort of built in. Like, I want to see it more integrated into the product. I want to see it built into the product more, so that we don't have to think about it as this completely separate thing. We should all be thinking about growth. Growth is all of our problems, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so in thinking about it from a product perspective or design perspective, how do you start thinking about it at the beginning of building something? You can think about who your ideal user is going to be, and then sort of doing the research around that. But how do you build that into the actual design of the product or the service that you're putting together?
So it's interesting. So it's interesting. If you go to growthhackers.com, which is a site that I look at a lot, there will be about 1,000 sort of quick tips for how we got to 2 million users with no marketing and no ad spend, or how we increased our conversion by 3,000% with this one small trick. And those are great. Like, I think it's really useful to understand all of those tactics. But the most important thing that we can do as UX designers, as product managers, as entrepreneurs, is to understand, instead of just throwing a bunch of sort of random tricks and tactics at growth, we need to understand the strategy. We need to understand what type of growth is right for my product. And let me explain. I think when we talk about growth, a lot of times what people think about is they think about that very viral, we're going to invite all your friends, and we're going to get you to invite all your friends, and we're going to make it a chat product. And it's like, we think about WhatsApp, and we think about Snapchat, and we think about these things that are growing like that. Not all products are like that, right? There are still products that are getting sold to Fortune 500 companies in a really traditional way. Those still have to grow. We still have to think about, where do our customers come from, right? Who are our customers? How do we keep them around? How do we go out and make more of them? How do we find adjacent markets? And so to do that, one of the most important things that we need to do is to understand which engines of growth are right for our company and for our product.
So let's talk a little bit about those engines for growth. I mean, can you sort of describe, I know there's some, the book touches on 3, what are some of the growth drivers that people need to think about? And how do you determine which ones are right for your product?
Yeah, so it's funny. There's actually 4. There's 4 engines of growth in the book. It's fine. I always laugh that people are constantly talking about pivots and customer development and all of that. I think that's because that's the first half of the book, and that's what's kind of towards the end. So maybe people haven't gotten around to it. That's fine. Totally understand. So there are these four engines of growth, and they are side effect, word of mouth, paid, and sticky. And sticky's cheating a little bit, but we'll get to that in a minute. So side effect growth is really the viral one that we were talking about, very similar, right? So something that has side effect growth would be Facebook, right? Facebook's the perfect example of side effect growth. You can't really use Facebook without other users. And to make it at all worthwhile as a product, or at least, at the beginning, now there are other things you can do with it, but like to make it at all worthwhile, you have to invite your friends because it doesn't work without your friends. So the side effect of using the product is that more people come into the product. And then also the side effect of my posting a status or my going in and liking something that somebody else posted, every action that I do within the product serves to engage people more, to engage the other users, to bring them back in and to go through and to really increase growth. Word of mouth is different. It is related. Word of mouth is just very much getting people to, talk about your product. And the interesting thing about word of mouth is that it is incredibly important and incredibly difficult to achieve, because word of mouth is not just about like making a great product and suddenly everybody's going to talk about it. Look, your users are busy. They're busy people. They have things to do. They're not thinking about your product. Nobody's thinking about your product, at least not nearly as much as you are. To get people to talk about your product, it has to be great and it has to be surprising. You really have to it has to be something that surprises people. It has to be surprisingly great for people to talk positively about your company. Very easy to generate negative word of mouth. You just have to be surprisingly terrible.
Yeah.
Paid growth is another one that a lot of people kind of, fall back on. The problem with paid growth is that for it to be sustainable, you really have to be paying for all of that growth with revenue from your customers. So it's not a great model. It's not a sustainable model for people who are making a little tiny amount on each individual user that they're acquiring. It's really got to be for sort of big, fairly expensive differentiated products that, where, if somebody buys my product, that's going to create enough revenue that I can go off and acquire 3 new users for, to also acquire. I was like, say, if you're selling eyeballs, you're not going to make any money on paid growth. If you're selling Ferraris, it's probably a good way to go. And then the last one is sticky growth, and I always laugh that sticky is kind of cheating, because sticky is necessary but not sufficient. Sticky just means you keep the people that you acquire, because it is much, much, much cheaper to keep people that you have acquired rather than constantly going out and bringing in new ones. Too often companies just turn on the fire hose and start pouring people into a really leaky funnel. And you could acquire 1 million users tomorrow, and if you lose 1,000,001, you're not in any better shape, right? You haven't grown. You have taken 1 million users and just burned them. So sticky means really retaining the users that you have, and it is a growth multiplier. It's a major part of the growth engine, but it's not necessarily something that we often think about when we think about growth, but we should be.
Right. So in the when you're in the design process and you know that you've got the growth engines, how are you identifying? I mean, you're figuring out who the ideal customer is, and then you have to sort of match them up with what you think is the right driver. Correct. Right. So what are some of the ways that you would sort of tell people how you do that?
Well, so like I said, really understanding what your business model is, and this is one of the things that I always like to say when I'm talking to UX designers, like, folks, you're great. I know you're great at empathy, you're great at understanding your users. Let's also understand the business. And some of them do, some of us do. It's really important. If you can find a UX designer who really understands the business, you are golden, because that's incredibly important. You need to understand something like, do I have a product that I can make that is a side effect product, right? Is this something where people are naturally going to invite and engage their users into the product? If so, you can identify whether or not you have a really social, connected product, or you have something where people are more or less connected to the company. So let me give you an example. Like I said, Facebook, Twitter, all these things where people are connected to each other, right? When I go on Facebook, I'm not connecting really with Facebook. I'm connecting with my family. I'm connecting with my friends. When I go on TurboTax, like, I'm not connected to any other TurboTax users, right? I'm connected to TurboTax. I'm doing my taxes. It doesn't do me any good. It doesn't improve the user experience at all to chat about it with my friends or to invite new people in or to do any of this stuff, right? So you really have to understand, do I have this really interconnected product, or do I have something where the product is just connected to the users? If it's a really interconnected product, you need to find ways to amplify that. Is it making it easier to invite people? Is it making it so that every time I perform an action, it creates something that draws another user back in? Do you allow me to really interact with other users in such a way that they become more engaged? So you want everything that I do as a user to engage other people. But like I said, you need to understand your business model. If I know that for every new user I bring in, we can actually monetize them to the tune of a couple $1,000s, maybe we should be designing for, better paid acquisition. Maybe we should be ramping up a sales team. Maybe we should be, designing better ads and improving the onboarding flow so that people who get paid, or people who we acquire from paid advertising, have this really smooth flow into the product and immediately get engaged with it. These are just different ways of thinking about how to grow the product and how to sort of design for growth. And there's, like I said, there's a million different tactics, right? There's email marketing, and there's, we're going to A/B test our headlines, and we're going to, mess with our landing pages, and that's fantastic. You're going to be involved in all of that too. I actually talk about most of this stuff in a lot more depth. I'm teaching a class in this. It's going to be like a 6-hour online thing where I'm just teaching some more text. I'm doing that with O'Reilly a little bit later this summer. So if you're interested in knowing sort of in much more depth than this, you should check out the class.
Awesome. Yeah, I know there's so much to talk about. We could probably do this for a couple of hours. So in thinking about the users and the growth engines and sort of putting all this together, how would you do some research? So if you research the ideal customer, you sort of identify them. You kind of also want to know where they live and what are they talking about in the real world. Mm-hmm. So how would you, as a product person or a designer, sort of where would you go look for that information to see where they're having conversations outside of you, out in the real world?
Yeah, absolutely. I do an ideal persona. I do a persona exercise when I'm leading people through this, where I have them identify who they think their ideal customer is. And it's interesting because, again, this is going to be very different if you have a product with users already versus you're in that very early adopter, still kind of looking for who your user is. If you have users, if you have customers, you're actually in a great state to find all this out, because the trick is you just need to talk to some of them. You can find, and the questions that you need to ask of your actual customers are things like, where did you hear about this product? How did you come to us? You also need to look at your metrics, right? Look at your referral information. Where are people coming from? This information all exists. But I really like talking to people about these kinds of questions. You can ask them things like, how did you find out about this product? What convinced you to use this product? What made you decide that this was right for you? Try going after the people who came, checked you out for a little while, and then left. Those are fantastic people to do research on, because what you can ask is, again, where did you find out about us? What did you think you were going to get? And what didn't you get that you had hoped to get? Right? That's an amazing research tool for understanding why you're acquiring the wrong users, which is as important as figuring out who the right users are to acquire. I'll give you one quick little trick that I like to use. Excuse me, I've got a bit of a cold. One of the things that I like to do is I like to I create my persona. This is my ideal customer. This is the person that I think she's the one that I'm going to sell my product to. Like if I found this person, she would absolutely buy my product, right? And then I like to find out if that persona is predictive. And here's how I do it. I create my sort of vision of her, all of her behaviors, her goals, her problems, her demographics. And then I go out and based on that persona, I recruit 10 people, just like that, just based on the persona of this person that I've written down. And then I pitch her my idea, and then I pitch those 10 people my idea. If 8 of them don't want to buy my product, I don't have a predictive persona. I am looking at the wrong people. If I personally can't sell my product to 8 of the 10 people that I have identified as my ideal customer, I've got the wrong ideal customer, right? Because those people certainly, if I can't sell it to them personally, they're not going to just find me and start using my product on their own. So you really have to be very iterative about continuing to do this exercise and making sure that you're finding the right people, you're figuring out where they hang out, where they talk. One thing a lot of people do ask me sort of like, how do I find those first few people? I'll be honest, if you can't find 10 people in your ideal persona, somehow, if you don't know where they hang out, you might be building the wrong product. Because we have to be able to find those people. These are like, how could you even go out and talk to them and build a product if you don't know who these people are and where they hang out and what they do?
That's very true. It's a good point. And so once you do that and you're successful and you've gotten to the point where you've got a couple of thousand users, then what do you do? How do you scale it? How do you get all of the other people? How do you move to a larger acquisition strategy?
Yeah, again, big question, and
yes.
take the class because I think that's too big of a question to answer, sort of briefly. I think that the truth is that you need to find that repeatable strategy that works with your engine of growth. One thing I will tell you is, when you look at those engines of growth, your product eventually have more than one, right? We should all have sticky products. We should all have products that retain users. We should all be aiming to get great word of mouth. Like we should all be trying to build something that's so surprisingly wonderful that people just all talk about it. Here's the thing. When you're a startup especially, you work on one at a time. If you try to work on all of them at a time, if you're doing, paid and side effect and we got to create word of mouth, we got to create buzz, we got to get PR, you will fail, right? It is too much. Work on one at a time. And I think that this is, I mean, screw talking about growth. This is just true for startups. Focus is going to be your most important weapon. Pick a metric, and the metrics that we care about for growth are really acquisition, conversion and engagement, and then retention. So in other words, bring people in, turn them into users by sort of getting them to that aha moment, that moment of value where they go, oh yeah, this is a great product. And then keep them around, keep them coming back. And so you need to think about those metrics. You need to have all those metrics in mind, but you'll do much better if you pick one of them at a time to work on. It's actually one of the reasons that we do things in the order that we do, where we get the first, we work on acquiring those first 100 or 1,000 users, and then we work on engaging them. Right? We work on making it a great product. We work on getting them converted, turning them into really passionate early adopters. And then we work on closing up the holes in the funnel, turning our funnel from a sieve into an actual funnel so that we're not flying out. And then we make sure that we're retaining them, we're keeping them coming back. And then you refocus on acquisition once you've got that set, right? Once you've got your funnel sort of plugged up so people are moving through the funnel well, that's when you need to go back and start focusing on acquisition. And again, you need to focus on acquisition, bring in new people, and then you need to make sure you're converting them. And then you need to make sure that they're sticking around. Because each new sort of group of people that you bring in, you're going to have to go through this process.
Right. You make it sound so easy. Very simple.
Oh, yeah, no, I shouldn't. That is a terrible mistake on my part. No, I'll tell you, I don't think there are harder things to do in business than to get this right. I think focus actually may be the hardest thing to do, especially for startups. I feel so bad for them because they just, I want to do everything at once. But startups, like the nature of startups is to be resource constrained.
Yeah. Well, it's very clear though, which is really good. I mean, it's nice to have such a clear idea of of the steps that you need to take in order to do this. So I know that it's not easy, but it is very clear if you're thinking about it right, which is good. It's very useful and helpful. The questions are starting to roll in, so I'm just going to pick a few as we're going through them because we're 40 minutes in. So the first question is what book? So it was the Lean Startup book that we were referencing. Just to answer that question. That's the first one.
The Bible? Come on.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Lean Startup book, the reason we're all here today.
Yeah. The second question, and this might be, this is sort of a big question, but how do you approach growth locally, nationally, and globally? So do you look at them differently?
That's a fabulous question. Yes, absolutely. One of the things that, I'm again, a very large question. I can sort of address it generally, which is that, first of all, growth is actually, ironically, easier when you start in a smaller market. So, for example, something like Uber starts in a city, right? And they figure out that city. They figure it very local. They keep it very, very local. And then they move to another, then they kind of figure out that, okay, how do we acquire people? How do we engage people? How do we keep them come back? They do one of those cycles. And then they move to another city. And they do the same thing. And so that is one way to do it, because what happens is you're creating basically an entire ecosystem, an entire small ecosystem, but an ecosystem of your product and of your users and of your community within that local environment. When you move into global, your acquisition strategies can really change because, not everybody has all of the same tools that we do. Not everybody is necessary. Well, everybody is on Facebook. I shouldn't say that. But, the same SEO tactics aren't going to work in the United States as work in, say, China, where I think Google is technically not even allowed. So you need to, and you're going to have totally different competitors in those markets. You're going to have totally different financial, like the financials of a paid product in other countries are going to be entirely different. So yes, I would say that starting hyperlocal for the kind of product that works best hyperlocal is one sort of strategy for creating growth early and then moving that to another place. You have to make sure that you have the kind of product that can be sort of transitioned from San Francisco to New York, and you also have to understand when you're doing something like that, that there is a difference between New York and Beijing. And having people look. Remember, everything is local to someone. So if you have a product like that, I strongly recommend finding people who actually understand local in that area.
Yeah.
But again, it's a very big topic, and there are lots of other things we could talk about with it. But
yeah, great points. Great points. So the next question is, how does sticky growth engine actually cause growth?
So I would say that unsticky products ruin growth. So again, sticky is necessary but not sufficient. You can end up, if all you focus on is stickiness, if all you focus on is retention or reducing churn, you could end up with a product with the dozen happiest users in the world. And believe me, I have worked on that product before, right? But you don't actually grow. However, stickiness is a multiplier of growth. So in other words, like I said, if you're pouring 1 million people in, if you're losing 900,000 of them, your growth is going to be a lot slower than if you're acquiring 1 million users and keeping 900,000 of them, right? So what you want to look at is how do I put this? Most of us are past the point where we care about, registered users. Registered users is a vanity metric, right? Registered users, the number of people that we've managed to get to come and download our app, not actually the number that we care about for growth. What we care about for growth are engaged users, or retained users, people who come, who use it, who stick around, who continue to pay us, who continue to generate revenue, who continue to bring more people in, who continue to talk about our product. Those are the people that we actually care about. And you can't get that if you're just burning all the users that you acquire.
Great. So the next question is, how do you think about growing a non-software product? And how do you approach designing real-world user experiences that drive growth? Two different questions in one question.
Wow. Okay. The great thing, I'm going to have you remind me of the second one, but the great thing about the first one, how do you do it with non-software products? The same way, basically. The concepts are the same. However, your tools to measure things are going to be very different. You're not going to be able to necessarily do split tests of, landing pages. That's not necessarily a thing you do. However, remember, a lot of acquisition, the acquisition part of growth, and I don't want anybody to think that growth is just about acquisition, but it is a big part of it. The acquisition part of growth is often very much about technical thing. It's a lot of it's technology, right? We sell things online all the time. So you can experiment with things like landing pages, and you can experiment with newsletters, and you can experiment with email copy and that kind of thing, and really optimize your messaging. And you can use software to do all of that, even for a physical product. However, when you actually get to the point of the conversion to purchase, you're going to have to use entirely different tools than you would in a software product. But the concepts are the same. You're still going to want to go with, you're going to want to pick your engine of growth. You're going to want to figure out who your ideal customer is, where they hang out, who their influencers are, how to acquire them, how to convert them, and how to retain them, and how to get them to come back and buy another thing for you. I've forgotten what the second one was.
It was, how do you approach designing real-world user experiences that drive growth?
So designing real-world user experiences is a fantastic topic that what you should do if you want to talk about real-world user experiences is start looking at something called service design. Service design is fabulous. We don't have a tremendous amount of it in this country, actually. They do a lot more in Europe. But it is absolutely fascinating. It is, again, an enormous topic. There are books written about it. There are conferences for it. I don't want to try to address it in 3 minutes and trivialize it entirely. But there are actually, there are ways to do rapid prototyping on service design, which is fantastic. My favorite story about this is hospitals actually do a lot of service design, which makes a lot of sense. They will actually build cardboard hospitals to understand, like, patient flow through certain areas, or to understand, how things should be laid out, or to understand. And they'll have people actually go through sort of these cardboard buildings with everything sort of set up differently, so that they can quickly reconfigure how things work, so that they can see, oh, this is actually going to be a problem, that this room is too far away from this other room. So we can design real-world interactions and real-world buildings with all of these tools. But again, check out service design, very interesting.
Yeah, that's a great analogy too. It's like you think about architecture and the way users experience, right? Yeah.
Oh yeah, actually, yeah. I mean, going and watching people actually live in houses. I always feel like there's always something weird in a house where I'm like, I feel like the architect didn't live in a house, right? That they did that strange thing. Like, why is that closet? Why are there no plugs? Why, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's funny when you think about it, but that makes total sense. It's a great analogy. Here's a good question. It often feels like the roles of marketers and UX people overlap. How do you avoid conflict in a startup or an organization, or both? Large organization, small organization?
No, that's a fantastic question. I love that. Yes, I think UX and marketing do overlap. I think product management and UX overlaps. I think product management and marketing overlaps. I like to think of it this way. I'm a huge fan of balanced teams and cross-functional teams, and groups of people working together, not in silos. This is a big, big part of Lean Startup. A lot of Lean Startup does not work well if you're in a company where sales sits in a different building and marketing sits in a different building and UX is an agency, And it's just really hard to build products that way. So the way that you avoid conflicts is that you actually form product teams where people work together kind of all the time, right? That if marketing isn't in another building and you don't sort of see them as people you have to make happy or people that you have to like bring in at the end to like do this other stuff, if you're actually working next to them, you develop a great working relationship with them. As a user, if you're a user experience designer, you can use a little something that we like to call empathy, where you actually understand, who this person is and what their needs are and what their job is, and you can really come to respect what they do. I know I have. I mean, working with fabulous marketing people, I've really come to respect what they do, and I think it's fantastic, and I think they bring a tremendous amount to the table. So I think that if you're ever saying to yourself, like, wow, there's so much conflict with this other team, I mean, use some of your user experience design skills to get out there and understand what they're trying to do, what their jobs are. I would say, I think you can even develop empathy for your engineers.
That's a great point. I mean, at the end of the day, everybody has the same goal, right? Everybody wants the product to be successful. Yeah,
let's all row in the same direction, guys. I mean, we're just trying to build something, and if we all actually my favorite analogy for this is that of a heist team. I always say that when I join a startup, I don't want to join a startup. I want to join a heist team, and I want to have a collection of experts. I want to have the best safecracker. I want to have the best, con man. I want to have the best planner. I want to have the demolitions person and you really, when you have that and you're working really closely together to pull off a heist. I really enjoy heist movies, I'll be perfectly honest. But when you're working that closely together, there's just a tremendous sense of trust and a feeling like that person's going to bring something really important to the table, right? If without that person, we couldn't crack the safe. Without that person, we couldn't write the right copy. Our messaging would be terrible. We wouldn't develop, without the community manager, our community would revolt, as we have seen in recent days, maybe with some things that are maybe going on in the world, without the right people in place who are taking care of things, everything doesn't go as well. And so, we respect the fact that marketing has a lot to bring to the table, and we respect them, I think, more when they're on our team every day and we can see what everybody's doing.
Yeah, another great analogy, the heist. That's fantastic.
I love the heist team. I want to join a heist team.
Yeah, I suspect somebody's going to quote that or use that in some sort of pitch to their management.
The police will come knocking. I get it.
Right. Here's an interesting question, and I'm going to take creative license with it a little bit. But if your market is if your customer is somebody with, or a group of people with sort of something that they don't want to talk about publicly, like it's a healthcare product, let's say.
Sure.
How do you get their data? Like, how do you find where they are if they really are difficult, if they don't want to talk about it? Do you have thoughts on how, especially a product developer or a designer, can actually get to the core of the problem and what they really need?
Yes. The finding them and the getting to know what they really need are actually two different pieces. What I will tell you is, I don't care how embarrassing the thing is that they're talking about. They are hanging out with other people like them online and talking about it. There is a subreddit about it. There is a support group for it. This exists, and I mean, honestly, that is, I think, one of the most wonderful things about the internet is that we can find people who are like us. I have done research on all kinds of things that some people would consider to be really embarrassing, but these are things that they're living with, right? It might be a medical condition, right? But if they have a medical condition that's really rare, really embarrassing, they're probably talking to other people with that medical condition about how to fix it, right? There are entire forums and online communities devoted to this. Now, how to actually engage with those people in an authentic and non-invasive way, that's where having somebody who is very skilled at user research, empathy, and just general understanding of how to do good qualitative research will help. Often people can, often entrepreneurs and product managers, I think, should be doing their own user research. I think when you're doing anything with a really sensitive topic or something that's highly regulated or something that has a lot of, that might have some issues come up, I think it's worth it to bring somebody in who understands things like ethnography and who understands how to be sensitive to the needs. This is just like when you do user research in another country. It's often a great idea to bring in somebody who is a local, who can not just translate for you, but who can explain to you the culture, what's going to be perceived as rude. Should a woman be interviewing a man? Should is that going to make people uncomfortable? Should we be going into the home? Should we be taking off our shoes? All of these kinds of things can be handled with delicacy and with respect. And I think, like I said, bringing in somebody who's really good at user research can help with that. And specifically with, this kind of user research can help you with that. I wouldn't just go blundering in. I'd find somebody in the community. Also, I'd find somebody in the community who has the problem, who wants to be your advocate. That can be a really big deal because, you don't want to go in like, oh, I'm going to fix this problem for you. But on the other hand, if you're really going to fix this problem for them, they're probably pretty psyched. So find somebody who can be an advocate and who can speak up for you in the community and who can introduce you in the correct way.
That's great, and also it points to the empathy discipline that's that designers have. So it should be natural, right? To think about how to go.
Designers should have, and that I would argue that we all should have. But it's hard. I get it.
Yeah. So we're starting to wind down. So there's a few more questions. Somebody wants us to recap the 4 growth engines. So maybe we can just mention those one more time before we end the broadcast.
It's in the book. And by the book, we mean the Lean Startup book, the only book we all read, but apparently haven't read to the end. So side effect, word of mouth, paid, and sticky. And again, I'm going to be going into all this in much deeper detail, including sort of helping people. I've got an exercise to help people pick, and a framework to help people pick which one is actually right for their startup or which ones are right for their startup. So there are some questions that you can ask around, figuring out whether something is the right one, if you should be going for word of mouth, right now. And remember, side effect and word of mouth are somewhat related, right? And we should all be going for sticky, but maybe not right this second.
Great. There's one more question I'm going to ask before we wrap up, and I'm going to, again, take some creative license just to make sure I'm getting to the question. So how can you integrate growth in a smart way into your overall business goal? For example, I'm thinking if you're working for an organization for this is like a new concept, or it's a goal, but it's not necessarily a strategy, this idea of growth. How can you incorporate it, or how do you talk about it in a way that everybody can sort of understand? Before you build a product, you can build sort of growth engines into the development of the product.
Well, sorry, I just noticed somebody asked a question. If I could stay for a few minutes, I can. Yeah. That's fine. So, can you give me a little bit more context on that question? Because I want to make sure that I understand it.
That's the question. So I'm sorry. It's how could growth be smartly integrated into your balanced scorecard and business goal? So I'm sort of extrapolating.
Got it. Okay. So growth. I may or may not answer this question correctly, but I'll tell you something that I think is interesting. That viral hockey stick growth that we talk about and that we think about when we think about sort of growth and growth engines and viral and blah blah blah. Those are actually not right for everybody, for every company. That isn't the goal of every single company. Again, if you're a consulting, if you're in consulting business, right, you may not want or be able to grow sort of in a hockey stick because you could be completely overwhelmed. You may not have a really scalable thing or a thing that makes sense to grow in that way. That said, you still probably want to grow some. It may not be that you want to, hockey stick, and it may not be that you want to think about viral growth, but you still want to talk about bringing new people in and keep, engaging them and making them happy customers and retaining them. That's what this is all about. So if you don't talk about it as like growth hacking and email marketing and like don't talk about the tactics, right? Talk about the strategy, which is like find a community of people that you can really help and figure out how to figure out where they live and where they work and how to engage them and how to attract them to your product, and then figure out how to get them very quickly into the into the product and make them understand that this product will make them better as people. That this is actually it's not just a great product. This product will make them great. This product will make them successful, right? Get them to success as quickly as possible, and then think about ways to keep making them successful, to keep making them want to come back, to keep making them happy and engaged users. So if you think about it like that, it's not this sort of big, scary, growth hacking thing. It is really about making a great product that people use, but it's also about thinking about where are the users going to come from, and how am I going to make sure that they stick around, and how am I going to maximize my possibilities of having them help me acquire new people? How do I sort of concentrate on those things? How do I just make that better?
Excellent. That's great. It's a great point to end on. So I just want to ask one more time where we can see you between now and the conference. I know you're online and you're doing this class in September. So before we sign off, I'd love for people to know where they can reach out to you and learn more, because there's just so much to talk about.
So I answer every email that gets sent to me eventually. I am Laura at usersknow.com. That is KNOW, not users know. So I keep threatening to set that up. So I'm Laura at usersknow.com. I do answer all emails. I'm on Twitter at Laura Klein. I'm like I said, I am doing this talk, it's a class. It's a hands-on workshop where you'll learn all sorts of both strategy and tactics about growth for O'Reilly. You can look that up. Just Google UX design for growth for O'Reilly and Laura Klein, and it'll come up. The landing page may have the wrong date on it because it's an experiment, and sometimes experiments have to be changed in flight. So just keep that in mind. You can still sign up for it, and you'll be told of the actual date. Let's see. I'm teaching a class at Stanford if you are in the Bay Area in the fall at continuing studies, so you can just take that class. And yeah, if you watch me on Twitter, I talk about this stuff all the time. And I'll see y'all at the Lean Startup Conference.
Great, excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. It's so great to talk to you. I learn so much every time, and I know everybody else is learning a lot too.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's fantastic. So Jeanette, I'll hand it back over to you.
Thanks to everyone for joining us today. This wraps up our show. Please join us again for the next webcast on July 23rd. In the meantime, visit leanstartup.co for more information on the Lean Startup Conference, November 16th through 19th in San Francisco. See you there.